My name is Aaron Robb. I'm principal here at Wahconah. We're very happy to have everybody here. We'll do some quick introductions, but we really want to set aside a great deal of time for our design team from DRA to explain the Wahconah school building feasibility study process that we've experienced to date, and also to get the dedicated bulk of the time to get information and feedback from all of you based on what you heard, your reactions to some of the proposed designs, and your own thoughts about the impact it may have on our community and our children as well. So we're very excited to be working with Carl and his team from DRA, the design team, who will be leading the discussion tonight. We also have our owner's project manager, representative John Benzinger over here from a company called Stanska. They are both working together to build, to finish off now the new Taconic. They're very familiar with the area, and they've done a lot of work over the years throughout the state, have a great deal of experience with the Massachusetts School Building Authority, MSBA, as well, which Carl will speak to. We also have our superintendent, Lori Kaz, in attendance tonight, and we also have other members of the Wahconah School Building Committee. If you could maybe just raise your hands just to dispense the introductions, but we do have other folks here from the School Building Committee here tonight. That's all of them, but they're not all here. Certainly the ones that are here are Dalton residents or at least interested in hearing from you. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Carl.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. So there's a quick little organization chart where we are working for the School Building Committee. That's the way we see it, the owner's project manager and us as design team. But there's also another partner here. We'd like to point out that these initials stand for the Massachusetts School Building Authority. They're a partner here because they will financially participate in the project to a great extent. They reimburse projects like this. They are reimbursing this feasibility study phase at about 54%, something like that. But they also set some standards about the process and guidelines for school building across the state so that there is some equity and parity across the whole state. And just to put in context where we are, there are sort of three main parts to this phase of the project. We've completed the first one already, the preliminary design program. That was submitted in May, and it focused on these three aspects, really. It developed an educational program, which was a document developed by the school with some assistance by us and a lot of other people too. That talks about, how teaching and learning should happen in this district, regardless of whether the school gets renovated or replaced with new construction or whatever. It's an educational plan, not an architectural plan. The existing conditions is our team of architects and engineers going through the building, analyzing the building, both for its sort of physical conditions and also kind of educational conditions. How well is it meeting standards and so forth. And then in that first phase, we developed alternatives, and I'll share those with you tonight, because our next task in this stage is focused on developing a preferred, what's called a preferred option, or the MSBA's terms, preferred schematic, that will get submitted in September. So over the next couple of months, we're going to finalize this and come up with one option to submit to the state. And at the same time, if we need to, we'll update the education plan. We'll share with the state how we evaluated these options to get to the final one, because they are partners through this. We are working with them. John is your owner's project manager, files regular reports with the MSBA, and so forth. And then the third phase is geared towards taking that one option and developing it in greater detail so that we can put a good cost estimate to it and fully explain and understand the scope, the budget, and the schedule of the project. And once that's done, then we can submit that to the MSBA in February to be approved at their April board meeting, and then it will go before the voters in your entire district. And that is a district-wide vote that will happen next spring, meaning all the towns vote at the same time, and it's not a town-by-town vote, it's a regional vote. All the votes counted, and 51% carries the day in that regard. But there'll be a lot more about that when we get to that point in the project. Right now, what we're really looking at doing is getting input into the project. We're not here to sell the project, so to speak. we're here to understand it. And just to give you a little background, this is that educational planning part of it. It started with meetings like this and broken into small groups, but this is the kind of the game plan. We start with an education plan, we develop options, we develop criteria objectively to evaluate those options. So it's not just a beauty contest or kind of an emotional decision. We make a short list, which we have tonight, of narrowing down to 5 options, and then we want to select one that we carry forward and becomes the project that gets developed more fully in details and ultimately constructed. This was a good summary statement of one of the guiding principles that came out of the educational plan. As many of you know, your parents, or if you have students here, or some students here, maybe a couple, Wahconah offers a broad range of opportunities here. Ones that you often just see at larger schools, but it still maintains that small school feel. There were a lot of other principles that sort of came out of the education plan and the visioning sessions in various categories, educationally, facilities-wise, teaching and learning modalities. Some of these you can see are geared towards bringing the school up to the 21st century in both its approach, which a lot of this is already happening. Some of this is not happening because the facility is kind of holding back the educational styles. And more specifically, some of those learning styles that aren't easily accomplished in this current facility are project-based learning, where it's not just students sitting in a lecture listening to a teacher for 50 minutes or something like that. It's a lot more hands-on. It's small groups collaborating. You need spaces for that. You need ways to make that happen. And just the way the building is arranged, the adjacencies and so forth can make that happen. And not to lose sight of, this isn't just about sort of intellectual learning. It's also about social and emotional learning too. And whatever. And again, the whole educational plan was developed regardless of which project comes out of this, whether it's a renovation or a new school. The education plan also had a few of these diagrams. A couple of the most important ones are the notion that the academic spaces could be organized into clusters. And you might think of this now more physically, but in other words, it's not just all similar sized classrooms lined up along the hallway, but more variety of spaces, large classrooms, smaller classrooms, organized around maybe more of an alcove or an open space that can be used for collaboration, that can be used for project-based learning, for instance. And that science labs are part of that cluster. They're not departmentalized where all the science rooms are together and all the English rooms are together and all the history rooms are together somewhere else in the building. The notion is that this could be a more flexible arrangement that allows for different kinds of organizations. And one of the ways to encourage that is to take the science labs and distribute them in the building. And that there should be teacher planning spaces associated with these kinds of clusters in the building. Right now, teachers kind of own a classroom, and when they're not teaching, they're doing their planning, and they stay in that same room. It's not the most efficient use of space, but it also doesn't encourage those teachers to collaborate with other teachers or to be really accessible to students, particularly in that kind of an arrangement. So that's an important notion that's all part of this. And if you take this up one scale, sort of, here's that classroom cluster, and try to make a whole school out of this. This now, again, it's more about adjacencies than really making a floor plan at this point. But you take that classroom cluster, and in this program of 460 students, we need probably 4 of those to make a whole high school. They're organized around the Learning Commons, which is kind of the 21st century evolution of the library media center. And it's a place where these students and teachers could come together. It's a very flexible space. It does have a lot of open spaces, but it also has smaller enclosed spaces and maybe project or maker spaces associated with it. It really is one of the spaces in the program that supports that notion of 21st century learning. And then you'll notice that the academic portion of the building is kind of segregated, you might say, from this part of the building. That was another thing that came out of the plan, that These spaces in particular, auditorium and gym, are used after hours. They're used on a slightly different schedule, and they're more accessible to the public. So the thought was this area of the building could more easily be closed off from this area of the building. We still want a main entrance with good control adjacent to administration for security purposes. But notice also there's a space called Student Commons. It's again a sort of evolution of the cafeteria, the space we're in right now. But instead of being kind of a segregated space here it's a more central space that acts almost as the gathering space and the lobby to these larger spaces. We do have some adjacencies here, but it's somewhat cut off from the gym and certainly cut off, from the auditorium on the other side of the building there. But the notion is that this isn't just a place that serves lunch. It's a place for students to hang out in early in the morning all the way through after school, or like we said, when these spaces are open in the evening or weekends. But it does need to be adjacent to the kitchen. It does serve food there, obviously, and there's some back of house needs. And there may be multiple entrances into these buildings, but there certainly should be one main entrance that's for control purposes where visitors are directed for security too. These are all notions that came out of the plan, the education plan, and that diagram. And as I said, we analyzed the building both for physical and kind of educational needs. This is one plan that identifies some of the educational space issues in the building, where these colors, this is a floor plan of the existing building. Here's the cafeteria we're in right now. The colors denote which spaces are meeting standards, current standards, and which are deficient, usually meaning they're small or otherwise deficient in meeting current standards. So red are the ones that aren't meeting standards, green are the ones that do meet standards, and the yellow is the ones that are sort of marginal in that regard. So you can see there are a fair amount of red spaces in the school, particularly the science labs, science classrooms rather, which today the desire is to have classes that also double as labs, as opposed to the notion when the school was built there was one lab here and there were these lecture spaces on either side, and you sort of had lecture at certain times and you scheduled the lab and went in there. Now it's a much more flexible arrangement where within one larger space, part of the room is given over where you could have lecture for part of the class time, but you could also, around the perimeter room, you've got all the infrastructure to do labs in those same spaces. So these spaces do not meet those kinds of standards. And some other general classrooms are on the small side. But one other thing to notice too, the plan kind of lacks that diversity of space. It doesn't have a great variety of space, and it doesn't have any of those open collaborative spaces that are unscheduled, that can be utilized for some of those 21st century activities. The gym here is shown in red because it does meet standards in that it has a full-size varsity basketball court. But in terms of a new school, the state guidelines would allow for a school, even a small high school like this, a gym of 12,000 square feet, and this is just over 9,000 square feet here. So what really is compromised here are the cross courts in there that if you put up a dividing curtain, you could have two activities going on, but as basketball courts, they are smaller. That's the basic difference there. The auditorium is actually, as many of you might know, is actually larger than standards would suggest nowadays. But there's been a strong commitment that we've heard both from these meetings and from the building committee and others that we want to maintain an auditorium of at least 550 seats, even though that's beyond what the state would reimburse. So this is sort of a summary of what I just said and some of the things that are lacking here in some of the spaces. Some are even missing entirely. There are no fitness or weight rooms. The nurse and guidance areas are undersized and really lack privacy because of the way they're sort of adjacent to other things there unnecessarily. We also looked at the building physically. You might remember, and we went through and identified a lot of system deficiencies, starting with the envelope of the building. The building is approaching 60 years old. There's a lot of it that's still original. It certainly doesn't need any kind of energy standards, building standards of today. We know that. And then a lot of the finishes too, these ceiling tiles, you can see how they're bowed, in other places even worse shape. Some of the flooring materials are, again, they're worn out, they're at the end of their useful life. But moreover, there are accessibility issues and still some hazardous materials that need to be addressed in any kind of a renovation of the building, if that were the case. And so this is sort of a statement that captures a lot of it, that even though there's been good maintenance here, that being 50, 60 years old, some of these systems are just beyond their expected life. And it's even hard to find parts to fix some of them. Some of these what's called unit ventilators, those units along the outside wall that provide ventilation into the space, those are tough to maintain. And they, again, from an educational point of view, they're noisy, they don't meet today's acoustical standards either. So it's getting harder to source. And so a lot of systems, materials, finishes would need to be replaced in even a base repair of this existing building. So the final part of the education plan was kind of a listing of spaces, a quantitative statement of what's needed. And this is the state form that it's on. It lists every space that's desired or exists in the building. It has one column that says how many of those spaces, how big are they today. The center part of it is how many of those are needed, how large are they in the future. And this third set of columns are the state guidelines for each of those spaces. So these guidelines talk about classroom size, science lab size, auditorium size, and so forth. And the state likes to compare this column against this column in determining what's reimbursable and what's not sometimes. And again, to remind folks, we're designing for 460 students. That is fewer than you have today. There is a general, demographic projection that shows slightly declining enrollments for the next few years. So that has been the agreed upon enrollment here. But as we've talked about several times, we are always thinking about flexibility both within the building but also for the ability for the building to expand too. Whether that's to take on more students from outside the district or inside the district or different grade configurations, we don't know, but it's just prudent to think about any building, any of this investment being able to be expanded. That's kind of a summary of some of the highlights of what's in that space program. The one takeaway is that right now we're aiming for about 128,000 square feet. This current building's about 114,000 square feet. So you can see, even though the enrollment is slightly lower than the current enrollment, you still need more space than you currently have in a future building. And part of it's because some of those undersized spaces, or primarily because of those undersized spaces, but also some of the missing spaces as well. As I said, the program still calls for a 550-seat auditorium, calls for the full-size gym, 12,000 square feet, and some of the other spaces. So these are the options that we want to share with you tonight and get your feedback on when we break up into smaller groups. The first one isn't really an option, but it's kind of a baseline that the state asks us to look at, so-called base repair, all those things I said that would have to be fixed or addressed to bring the building up to standards, even without changing any of the walls, the internal walls, without changing any classrooms or science labs, just to fix things that are broken. That's the base repair option. Then we looked at 4 options that were addition renovations, and they varied kind of in complexity, you might say, from ones that save the entire existing buildings to ones that save only a portion of the existing building and demolish the rest. And then we looked at 9 different options for new construction on a preliminary basis. So there were 13 options originally. And we used a preliminary evaluation, working with the building committee and getting your feedback last time, too, as to what was important in all. It ran over 2 pages because there were 13 options there. But here's what we've narrowed it down to. So of those 4 addition renovation options, we've narrowed it down to these 2, which are kind of the 2 extremes, you might say. Number 1 is the one that saves the entire existing building, renovates it fully, and converts some spaces internally, and adds a bit of new construction at one end, the so-called F corridor at the very end of the current building, creating another courtyard. And then option number 4 in the renovation family is saving only the gym and the auditorium and the connecting piece, which currently is administration, but in the future would be reprogrammed, and building all new academic space, in essence, wrapping around the gym. And then once that's done demolishing the existing building and redoing the site work. There'd be almost no change to the site configuration in this option. There obviously would be some new fields built in this option here. But let me just show you those in a little more detail so you can see them. There's the addition. Here's what the floor plan would look like here. So all of this kind of dark outline, that's new space. Part of it's science labs, part of it's classrooms, teacher planning, some open space. The yellow space in this diagram, that's corridor space, but you can see it also widens out in places. Those are those collaborative areas. But also notice that even in this main corridor, this is A corridor right now, it's no longer all similar classrooms marching down that corridor. We introduce some variety of spaces, so we get science labs over here. We get some smaller spaces, some seminar-sized rooms, in addition to full-size classrooms. So we're trying to map onto the existing building that idealized diagram of what the education plan called for. It doesn't meet it in all respects. It attempts to do that. The gym, for instance, remains the same gym, but the locker rooms get fully renovated, the kitchen gets fully renovated. All these core spaces that remain in their same space, like this cafeteria, would get fully renovated, but they do stay in the same kind of configurations. Still the administration, nurse and guidance would take over this space because now we've created some new teacher rooms. We would expand the learning commons, introduce a maker space, make it a little bit more open to the corridors, but it's essentially in the same location in the building. And we would introduce a fitness and weight room by consolidating tech ed, partly because we get a maker space in here as a project space, and that we could consolidate the tech ed program to those spaces. So that's the addition renovation number one. That's what it would look like three-dimensionally. It's, just more of the same one-story building back here. I know you can't see it so dark here, but it could be built without disturbing that soccer field that's back there. So it's sort of minimally disruptive from that point of view. But unfortunately, it's very disruptive from the renovation point of view because, yes, we could build this piece while the existing school stays in operation. The contractor would probably access, come around here. We'd have to put in an access road for the contractor and vehicles to get back there. Once that's built, it could be occupied as some swing space, but to give the contractor, a sizable portion of space, we would probably have to add modular classrooms during the school year to be used, temporarily during the construction period in order to renovate the rest of the building in phases, kind of in a checkerboard fashion, going around the school, making sure, that construction is always safely segregated from teaching and learning, and there'd be barriers built in corridors and so forth. But it could be done. It would probably take 3 school years to accomplish this. So that factors into our evaluation of these options too. So the other extreme sort of addition renovation option number 4 is the one where we save the gym and locker room areas and auditorium and music, and we fully renovate those areas. We convert the administration into art. So this kind of becomes art and music here together. And then we build, wrapping around the gym on 2 stories, new academic areas and a new entrance, new main entrance, a new administration area for security and control. We still get a drop-off area in front of the school and some parking there for visitors. And additional parking back here and a new entrance and a new cafeteria commons on the first floor and learning commons on the second floor, kind of in the center of the building. Again, think back to that diagram. That's what we're trying to achieve with these options. Once that's built, then the existing building can be demolished and the rest of the site can be developed with new fields here. And we actually gain fields in some of these options because the new option is 2 stories. It's a little more compact than the existing building. So that's number 4. That's what it would look like kind of three-dimensionally. As I said, there's still a drop-off area here. There's another drop-off area for cars, parking on that side, parking on this side, and then, green space is kind of consolidated behind the school here. Then on the new construction, we looked at a variety of locations in the site as to where a new building could be built, with the idea, obviously, that we try and find locations where construction could happen while the existing school stays in operation. And we identified those 6 areas And some of them, we had more than one option, so we ended up with 9 total options. These numbers, 1 and 4 and 5, those are analogous to those site positions. So 4, 5, and 6 are the options towards the back of the site, towards the football field and the middle school, separate the woods that separate the middle school. 1 is in front of this school. 2 and 3 are to the side of the gym and where the parking lot and baseball field are now. So again, we had 9 options originally, and after preliminary evaluation and discussion, we've narrowed it down to these 3. And then we sort of added a variation on this one, where it's a very similar configuration in site plan, you can see, but this one has a courtyard, fully surrounded. This one has a more open courtyard. So the floor plan is just slightly different, so we call it 2.8 1 as opposed to just A there. So basically you have 1, 2, and 3 as options for new construction. And so really the work now is to evaluate these options, get your input, get the building committee's input, and narrow it down, as we said, so that in September we submit one of them as the preferred option. So briefly to share these with you, here's number 1, new construction. It's in front of the school, basically where the drop-off road is now for the bus loop. There, very close, that orange line is the existing school. It's very close to the existing building. But luckily this is gym and there's kind of blank walls there. There are some windows in the office area that would have to be protected and separated. The entire construction zone would be separated, safely from the school. But you can see, because we're on top of the parking area a bit and the baseball field and the drop-off area, we'd have to build a temporary road and a new parking area back here during the construction period so that we could bring buses there, turn them around and leave, and we'd have parking to compensate for the loss of parking over here and create a temporary entrance or temporary, main entrance for these people here. We probably could get some visitor parking and still get visitors into this entrance by the auditorium during the construction period, but this is what the site plan would look like in the end. And that's the floor plan of it. Where the large spaces are at this end of the school by the entrance, the main entrance, the administration is here, auditorium, gym, kitchen, commons area, cafeteria, and then, this long straight corridor which supports these classroom clusters, and in the center of the school is the learning commons. And this is the second floor, it stacks, it's basically a repeat of the first floor. So just this portion of the building is 2 stories. You can see that here. So this is the 2-story portion of the building. These are all high 1-story volumes over the cafeteria, over the auditorium, over the gym. And you can see there's a bus loop in front of the building and car loop on the other side. So that's option 1. Option 2 locates the building on the current parking lot and on the baseball field, kind of to the side of the gym. So the bus drop-off could remain during construction. We'd probably add some temporary parking here, build this permanent parking and use it as temporary, because we're losing parking here. Remember, this is all going to be a construction site here. We'd still be able to get service vehicles back here to the loading dock while this was under construction. And you can see the floor plan, even though it's a different shape, it has very similar adjacencies to the other one. So there's a main entrance, administration, auditorium, music, gym, locker rooms, kitchen, cafeteria in this half of the building, and then this half of the building is a 2-story academic portion organized again into these clusters with learning commons to the center of the building there. So again, that's the portion that's 2 stories. All of these are high 1-story spaces and 1-story in between. And it looks like that 3-dimensionally. So this is 2 stories. This is 1 story at the office area, and then higher volumes here. And again, the entrance and driveways is roughly where it is today. So this is almost the same bus drop-off. We would just continue it and kind of focuses on the new entrance up there. So about half the parking is in front of the school. The other half kind of wraps around these 2 sides, and there's a secondary entrance here, kind of a 3rd entrance over here by the locker rooms to give access to the fields. So that's number 2. Number 3, there's 8.1 rather, the courtyard one. And again, the only difference really, as we said, it's basically the same organization. We slightly revised this portion of it to create the circulation that completes the loop. And this becomes an internal courtyard as opposed to external one. There's some advantages to that it's sort of contained, it's more secure. Some disadvantages that, these rooms now have kind of internal views instead of longer external views, but very similar plans, and we can study them both going forward. And the second story in this, likewise, is just the academic portion of the building. And that's what that would look like, three-dimensionally. And the third new construction option is somewhat similarly located on a portion of the parking lot and more on the baseball field. The one thing that changes is kind of the orientation here of this layout, because now the main corridor is running kind of north-south here. North is to the left on these plans. So these classrooms and all, they face east and west. We prefer, as you can see right now, this is west sun coming in at us right now in the afternoons, and the glare is kind of tough and on west-facing classrooms, and for natural light, south and north-facing classrooms are a little bit more preferred and a little better from energy performance point of view. But this building does satisfy the educational plan adjacencies, does fit on the site well with sort of minimal disturbances. But that's the one major difference is like we said. And the site plan here is a little bit different too, in that instead of entering down here, we put more green space here, right out to the road almost. We saved the trees that are right there, by the way. And you come in here and there's a bus loop with some parking in front, a car loop with the balance of the parking here, a little bit of a service drive with some parking to get back to the service area here. But again, this, the existing bus loop and parking would be built here temporarily. We could still get a service drive back here during construction, and all of this would be, safely segregated during construction. So that's option number 3. These are the criteria that we have now collectively come up with to evaluate these alternatives. These are what we'd like your feedback on. If there are some that are more important than others, that's important to us. If there's some that are missing that you think we should be considering that aren't up here, we certainly value cost. That's always important, but cost has a lot of different factors to it. As we talked about, there's reimbursement to consider. The state is reimbursing some of these, and the amount that they'll reimburse does vary on some of these options. They don't, for instance, reimburse on temporary costs, building temporary roads or renting portable modular classrooms. Those aren't reimbursable, unfortunately. So all those temporary kind of costs are not reimbursable. Obviously, too, there's long-term costs to think about in terms of operating costs, more energy efficiency, utility costs, and so forth. So these are ones that what we suggest doing are taking these, and I know you can't read this necessarily. We do have copies of it that we'll have around the tables, but taking those criteria, listing them, we kind of group them into 8 categories on this side. And then these are the 5 major options. This is base repair, which really isn't a solution at all, but it's just there for comparison. These are the 5 options, and then we've kind of ranked them preliminarily, us and the building committee and working group on a preliminary basis, using this color coding system where green is the most advantageous, red is the least advantageous, yellow is kind of neutral. So you can see these are the new construction options, these are the renovation addition options. And right now, in our assessment, the new construction options are scoring better in a lot of ways. The one major difference, you might say, is the cost. Right now, this first renovation option, which saves most of the building, is lower cost. And again, these numbers are not to be taken too seriously yet, in the sense that we haven't really got enough detail in these options to put accurate, specific costs. That's why they're expressed as ranges. They're more meant to be for comparison purposes. They're order of magnitude costs here, and they may change because the building may change. We may get new information on the site and so forth here. But the most important criteria that others have agreed upon is how appropriate are these solutions to solve the educational plan, to address and conform with the educational plan and the vision that was developed. So that's why these score best, and these are somewhat neutral or slightly better than neutral. This has a lot of new construction in option 4. But the cost of this is virtually the same as new, and so that's where this notion of long-term value comes in. The new options probably provide better long-term value than trying to renovate and salvage. And the second major category here is disruption and impact on students in teaching and learning. And this primarily during construction, and the length of construction. These renovation addition options take longer than these new construction options. So for a student, this might be 3 years out of his 4-year high school life. These can probably be built in 2 years or less in new construction, and they're less disruptive. They're not, trying to renovate the building while students are in it. So that's a factor too. Although we shouldn't lose sight of the fact this building's going to be here, whatever the project is, for 50 years, and it's maybe the final layout that's part of the evaluation of long-term value. So those are some of the criteria that we'd like to consider and get your feedback on. And we think the best way to do that is to break up into smaller groups, as we've done before. And in this room, I think we can just use these tables and get one group here, one group there, maybe 4 groups, one group there and one group here, with the number of people we had. And so you can divide yourself up, we'll divide ourselves up. We want to gather around and spend at least half an hour just talking about what you've just seen and heard and what's important to you, what strikes you. We're not looking, maybe you have a choice already as to what you think is best. If you do, if you're convinced, fine, we'd like to hear that. We also like to hear more discussion, though. We don't want to put an end to discussion and say we're voting tonight. We're not doing that necessarily, but please give us your feedback. And then we'll take the last 5 minutes or so and come back together and share what went on at each table, so you won't feel left out. If you weren't sitting at that table and you want to know what did they talk about, what did they think, and you were sitting over here, we'll share that. So we'll spread ourselves out and take notes at each various table. Okay? Oh, also, people were good enough to bring some snacks, so you can get up and help yourself, get a drink, and then find your place at one of these tables. Thanks.
I know. They must have a snack. These are not the most comfortable chairs to sit on. How are you? How are you? Your
Is your second one today?
Next weekend? Oh, okay. Yeah, really. I'm already overwhelmed. Hi, George. Thank you. You do? Oh, yeah, okay, Sarah, no, but I'm thinking so she was in Washington, D.C. for a while.
So after
last week they did talk about the platform. Yes, I'm not moving from that. Thank you.
I saw you live.
Yes.
We haven't got it. Wait.
Is the response going to be?
I know.
Well, no, it's more like we're applying to favorite results. What we're looking for is some direction on what the
Okay.
So one of the things we're interested in is smaller classrooms. So we're not going to that sort of thing. So what they got was the specs. And the specs have a lot of that kind of detail. We want to keep
Because I wrote down disruption takes a lot of.
Yeah, they are independent, he just kind of grouped them together, just in order to get everything on the board, and so that these things follow those logical groups.
And that has to be combined, we don't count it 3 times, it's all all we care about cost is to the district. You know, what the magnitude is prior to reimbursement is. It's wonderful, but
The one variation being,
so
So what are these two numbers? Because there's 3.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
What they'll be. So there's 2 sets of numbers, but there's 3 categories.
both of these, this has 2. These 2 both have.
So this number is this construction costs, and like, which one is reimbursable costs?
Those are 3 things that we want to look at and want to consider. So the first cost is the outside.
So that's this one right here. And then,
What we're showing you right here is just a very broad range of actual construction costs. This is usually the total project cost is going to be 94%. And that includes things like fees,
35% or 40% of that is
all kinds of tools, costs. They're not direct construction costs.
right. And the way that we assess
And
that
a lot of
is
times when you
it's based on each
you
town's
sometimes it's on one construction cost, sometimes it's on.
okay.
So
Those are 2 different numbers.
So this is construction and this is estimated total.
Right.
Okay. So there's no reimbursable cost in these, okay.
Well, yes and no. This is very,
Nothing stated here. I mean, obviously there'll be reimbursable, yeah.
and the reason for that is we're very early in the phase. So we don't have planning detail that we need in order to establish which items are reimbursable, which items are. And ultimately, as you said, what everybody needs to know is what the taxpayer cost of each one. So we will have that, we will give that. That'll be all worked out, everybody will see that. Before we
that's a priority that we have to
construction details.
But the town could be also with that. So if you look at some of these
Things that aren't covered.
One of that we do that basically.
When they're, if they're,
First of all, is to say
Well,
that
they're
you
non-reimbursable
know
costs.
for any project.
yeah, right, that divides
Cost because the district
you know, and you have to put temporary.
might just be a note
I think all of the non-reimbursables
So,
would be
dark
specific to
green
the project, and so
has the
they're not
most, light green is
the
good,
ultimate cost of the
yellow
town
is
is
so-so,
strictly based upon your
and darker
value
yellow
and
is red,
valuation.
not so good for as long as not. So that has them looked at, and is part of the
That makes
plan.
sense.
No,
By strength.
Yeah.
The population enrolled in the school or
Capability.
population roles.
Yes.
And this safety is safety and security, or
That's what I want to know.
security is
That
where?
may be it, because
You mentioned that a couple of the new buildings were like real close to the existing buildings. So there are certain lot of safety
Okay, so
issues
that would be
about
safety, but what about security from?
Talking about green, what's green?
That's something you want to consider when you're evaluating different options. So for example, you have one that had an open classroom, an open courtyard. So the closed courtyard is probably safer for the students working.
Okay, but it's a missing evaluation.
Right.
So we're
Well, it should
talking windows,
security should be on there, doesn't it?
Right,
Safest way, I think, probably covered.
What about the classroom? Will there be many windows, or is this like one house?
Well, that's a consideration. There are other things that lay out there, the safety concerns as well as solar gain.
Well, I was thinking also of safety with the window, the windows.
So ultimately, I think, cost benefit is what most people
Next step, that has to come up before, that we need to do that calculation.
And they don't have that yet.
Right.
Boiler efficiency, windows.
They said they had talked about.
Where are furnishings?
Where are they?
If that were
All right.
the case,
That's in the,
Cost is more
they
volume.
don't actually, I mean, there are some aggregates, they don't call them costs.
so the difference between the actual construction costs
On the other hand,
and then the project costs, the furniture is in that difference. It's on the project cost. It's called, FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, you'll hear that term a lot. So there'll be a number for that, but it's,
$33.
yeah,
All the labs,
established, yeah.
the
Current
lab
going rate.
facilities, the lab facilities, all included in this.
That's meant to last for a year, it's more like $450. So right off the top, there's some costs
Yeah, and I,
eligible for reimbursement.
I'm concerned
So
about
it's always
parking proximity to the gym. and
smart to keep in mind
Terry, and I see
that
you've got that.
you'll hear quotes of the district's reimbursement is 54%. But you can't apply that 54%
So,
of that, those
you know,
total
that would be
costs, because so much of it's going to be ineligible.
So what will
that
the actual
It's better to
heat
think about
be?
what the effect
For,
would be.
Not like
like,
those grade
extracurricular activities or things outside of school.
Graduation,
Not,
Yeah, public events.
performances.
because so many things we know
Over hot water.
are not eligible for reimbursement. And that's just the way they are. That's just the way they are. But it is a good.
There are some,
So the gray is the
Trying to,
parking, is that what I'm
Sort of add
understanding?
another line. This is what
Yes.
construction cost is.
Okay, so it would be
Project cost is.
here.
This is what the district's estimated share.
Is parking, or is this like a right-of-way road?
Yeah.
this is a road
Gas,
out
oil,
Yeah.
it could be geothermal.
here, transportation agencies.
Yeah.
Looks like
Yeah.
I'll see if I can grab the drawings.
I've looked at wood chips.
Generally, you try to make some provision for public parking, the gym, the auditorium, or isolate wherever they are. Usually we try to get some parking there for that event, in addition to the staff parking and the student parking.
Well, it's all automated.
I know, but still, that sounds like going backwards. This means,
I mean, a residential level, scale level, it's probably more viable than.
because, yeah, it looks like here.
Yeah, so, if you're involved with that, we're going to have to be lead certified in Massachusetts.
Give you a better idea of parking. This is the same, this is four times the same thing. So you can see in this version, this is a new construction version, here's your gymnasium, here's your auditorium.
Motion and action.
That's here.
Oh, gotcha.
And so this just shows you the parking, so you can see there's parking right out front, just for this parking.
This would be the main entrance.
So they feel obligated.
You really
Yeah, this would be the main entrance. So,
One of the things they have to watch out for.
yeah, for the students. And then this is another entrance. If this is all you're using, then you use that.
Even with minimal state reimbursement in another community.
So here's your bus transportation to drop off in the morning to school, and they have access to the academic area. And then at night, you close off your academic area. This is a two-story building here. This is steps on top of this.
And then there's
Exactly.
space.
That's kind of how it is laid out now.
Those three options, all in.
And the other two are
So this like workout, landscaping,
Demo classes.
I don't know exactly, Jason.
That's exactly.
But how much asbestos? There is some asbestos in the especially Florida.
This 3A is, oh, ABC.
Yeah, we're about to finish the
Is it an
time.
advantage to have large
First thing we have to
length
do is counting.
volumes in the front of the school? Is that,
That's these.
yeah?
Yeah.
Does that mean it doesn't look like a school when you drive by? People missing? Oh, that's the old folks home.
Leaching to the brick.
I think the advantage is simply public access for non-school
Kind of
guys.
windows would they have? Kind of this?
And this is the most, this one is the most
Probably
flexible.
not. Now, it'd be double glazed.
Like for addition, if we found out.
Right,
We have a few more classrooms.
expansion.
And then apparently they'd be at the ends.
Exactly, we could put another one of these right here. So the quarter
The question I had was about the
goes all the way
parking. How many
through.
parking spaces do we have now?
And one of the things that we do is we put in stairwells more at the end of the hallway. You can see them on the buildings, but we put it out of the way so that if there is an addition, you don't have to move the stairwell, it's all ready to go. And also gives you an opportunity to put some glass at the end of the hallway, so you're not looking at dead end down there. It kind of lights it up.
What about it must be elevators in the first story
Yep.
for handicap?
Where are we gonna be, now versus, when we finish the construction? Similar amount, or?
I think that's a good entrance to that questionably uncomfortable. I think
When
it's
we
just
get some of the
because
lobes
it's
in
probably
there,
set so far back.
Yeah, I think that did help in Windsor.
Well, you can see it's built between the existing buildings. You make out the existing building, and kind of like that lines here. So it's built between the existing building and the street. So it's spaces.
Years ago,
And out there right now, so
3 stories, and then we all went down to 1 story.
that'll work,
Now they're going back.
but it might be a little bit closer than you want.
Square footage
Dalton
space.
and
Now they have to go up multiple stories. Yeah, but not for security.
What's that?
So this is
Once
your
we're done
Yeah.
with construction, and
Orange hash is just the building.
the question is, why do you care how close you are to the
New building.
and then you think it might be considered, it might change the road.
Once the.
We talked about tax impact and long-term value versus cost. Calculate reimbursement. Any other criteria that we're going to
Actually, which is very attractive, it's only like 2%.
So this is the two variations of this. This is
So you gain more classes.
What are single loaded
the
porches?
same square feet, same square.
Well, yeah, they're more,
We're limited to how many square feet.
this is a double loaded core with percussion on the side.
Oh,
So it's the outside wall.
educators here, you know, many more on the building, you know, kind of agree that
And these are higher ceiling spaces.
you know, this doesn't quite make it, you know, renovation of the existing doesn't quite make it satisfactory that they have for how it's.
the current, oh, you're there,
courtyards, or are they public spaces that are utilized right now?
They're kind of used, from what I understand.
They used to be for smoking, right? Oh, just back when the building was built.
Yeah, one of the problems with courtyards is when there's activity in the courtyard, it impacts the classes. You know, if you open your windows and you're hearing everything's going on in the courtyard, and keep the windows closed, it's a bit of a distraction. So that's something that we want to address if we did that. The other thing is just maintaining it. It's hard to get a piece of equipment in there that mows the grass or whatever you got going on.
The closed up one, and closed one.
It's the same size as this one, right?
What's that
For student safety. Like, this is very easy to monitor because kids keep going in there.
Also, with that option, there's a little bit, with the closed courtyard, there's a little more flow. You create a hallway or a corridor across the end here, so you get a better circulation. In an open courtyard like that, if you're over here, you want to get over here.
So this one is the 2A.1.1 or
Now, do any of these have,
doors possible with frosted pass? Like this is the only option that has that.
Yeah, if you add it on to that, you'd be into some areas. It'd be difficult to do that.
Oh, okay, so it's this side.
The office is right there.
The south side.
Then you see it clear So we look at using
All of these options besides this one obviously offers the
Entrance would be the only one that visitors have.
double loaded quarters.
I'm looking at it.
Another thing we looked at, also being able to close off the academic wing, so we have a function in the chamber.
The new construction are all two-story options for the academic.
The estimated costs are very close.
That's what I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's surprising.
Even to just this one. Yeah. That's why I ran.
That's all, there's a real emphasis.
I can't imagine doing these that don't meet the standards.
Hi, Sarah. Very nice to meet you. There you Oh, nice. Just trying to get me to join the school. Oh, he's trying 5 times, right?
There we go.
Yeah, so I
See everything?
the building is removed from the existing building, so you can construct it, you would put up your fence around the area. The contractor will work closely, it can be constructed in
I had to run off with our entire
versus the renovation, it's probably going to be about 3 years. The other thing that they
5 high
have
schools in Connecticut.
we're going to be right at the school. You're going to lose, we have
You have to
to work, and you're
take
going to
notice
lose.
seriously. Yeah,
It's probably
everything runs together.
Has the building committee has seen this?
Oh, yeah.
Do they have a general
looked at
preference? Consensus?
looked at the football field, believe it or not, it's just sinking ground here.
So much visioning work that seeing
You have to bring
that
utilities and you have to bring
definitely is,
water
I think, a huge piece for a lot of people what will meet the educational needs long term. Given we're so far into this project, so I do
Driveways to
think
get
that some of the
further
ones
back
that you're already
into the
kind kind of bringing your eye to with the green, the educational plan matches very well. And then some, I think, of the other factors like temporary costs and things like that have been kind of negatives in some of the renovations.
Energy needed to build.
There's a
In the length of time to drive up the cost. Yeah. I think there's concerns around that, but that would mean too for us, like as a
But of course, it's
school.
money.
that-
Entire exterior walls.
For their
solid
career.
There's no
walls of the gym.
Right. With an outcome that might still have some limits in the
It's gonna look
educational
like
plan,
a
but that's just been the dialogue, I think,
Yeah,
kind of
towards
towards the green.
metal, maybe even the metal deck.
Well, you're just saying the costs
a lot of patches.
seem very similar.
And when you think about like, well, the cost it's in here for 34 months, that's the high cost for it could have other indirect impacts, but I think these ones are narrowed down from the 9, so there's pretty positive feelings about these ones to get from 9 to 5. These ones all definitely have benefits, even though they're still on the list. I keep going
As a
the 18
minimum,
months.
those are
I was thinking that too, that
Wow, that seems very,
fast,
very
the
fast.
18 months.
one level up, which gets the district.
Yeah.
That's appealable. Certainly, there's educators on the building committee as well, and parents.
But you do get,
Certainly get more value for your money when you do it that way. Contractors really like it, you know, numbers just blow it out. So you get a better price, and you can, the money that you save, you can put into furnishings or better floor finishes, you know, things like that.
Is there asbestos in this school?
There's some.
Is it in the tiles or floor tiles?
No, I don't know. I'm sure it's in floor tile. There may be some in the window caulking that's pretty close. You know?
Maybe some in the auditorium as well, because I know Jason's been hesitant about disrupting all of this. That's the thing, kind of like the novice side, you probably know more about, but once you disrupt it, then you have to replace all of it. You know, so he monitors it closely. But yes, there is
less
several
bad
areas.
than
It's kind of like the title,
we actually have to turn around
the
and
ADA
go the other
compliance,
way.
once you start
That's
to
what
make
net zero
certain
energy
changes, you have to bring it all up to
Put a
code, so
building
that limits certain things to
produce
do.
more energy
But there's a lot of
than
makeshift accessibility ideal.
if we can.
So the main
Frankly, that is a challenge in building this size. To do a net zero building, but several people.
Oh, right, I'm sorry, right, and there's
Super thick, well-insulated, tight building, so you don't get any air leakage.
There's been some debate around the Westmead Street, because the first
Yeah,
construction,
that's
there's
we love windows.
yes, that's come up a lot, whereas I think 2A, and then that variation on the courtyard seems to be quite popular. 2A1 has been used as promoted in this time. I think given the added security of being in this courtyard is very important.
Really.
we were asking, is the current programs, are they used at all?
Yeah, they do their so they are able to use that lunch primarily when there's nice weather. The problem is that there are classrooms that are directly abutting to them, so people disrupt them, yeah. So they definitely do let them use it, but it doesn't have like full capacity. There's also some, there's some that lives on it, it's like, I don't know, if the art teachers
So what
are
we
able
need to
to
do
do
is
birds.
take one of these
Where it's like beaches that have to close for
develop it.
piping plovers, yes. We have the courtyard that has to close for this bird that is flooding pneumonia. Yes, and she protects it very heavily, but yes. Other than that, they do use it primarily for lunch, not to the full capacity. Could be if it was in a better spot.
At that time, we did estimate the impact on still get invested there. One element, but it would be closer to what they're using courtyard.
Just
The two.
Yeah.
We're upstairs on the second floor down.
The perimeter though, and I don't know if that would be more if it wasn't direct. So like if you the physics class was constantly outside doing different things, but they tend to not be disruptive at certain times, they would use that. So I think there's definitely a lot more use of the perimeter because they don't have the space that they may use more. They have the space. The greenhouse is down the they do use that quite a bit.
I know what you're talking about.
Yes.
So we have a couple of ideas of what to do with them. We'd like to do a small version repair. Probably
It's supposed to be street, this is a big
traditional wood shop.
limited on the space because of the
Wood space is going to probably be more user space than instead of having a designated space for teachers to teach, it's a project room where you can just their classes and have the tools necessary.
They all have their.
So we're trying to say, you guys are kind of,
Would you guys agree? Not full vacation.
no, you're not.
I like other
You have
than
the vocational,
the,
limited this vocational purpose.
yeah, but I mean, if the energy system.
So we're not sure working space, we're not sure what it is.
So not in certain aspects of it, right? Certain parts of it, but not the whole building.
Air conditioning.
Yeah,
Basically,
everything's fully air
Oh,
conditioned.
the whole building?
All central air.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that. I thought it was just what we have right now. Oh, mine. The rest of the district doesn't know that.
and somewhat.
Does Madge know?
Well, she thought it was,
She's putting great grandparents.
because Taconic decided that not to do that, and that was $3 million position that they paid.
It's a little different, so we're
I
trying
must
to
have been a working group
stay on
when
the
I
edge.
this when I had a
But
baby.
you have good suggestions.
We have to move our office over here. It's lovely.
So in that case, if it is central air with the east-west orientation, really won't be that much of a
This color green
difference
is
except
the
glare.
best.
Oh, glare.
One step down. So, there's not a whole
It
lot.
does make a difference, but these systems are so sophisticated, that, like for example, I have an energy capture system, and what you look for is you go on building more than on individual classrooms. So, yeah, the east-west orientation works a little bit better.
Right, then I would think south getting sun all day long. But it's more about down to the learning environment to have that
Urban kind of solutions. Might be a little bit.
Right, for the learning environment, you like to have the north light in the classroom.
Number
You like to
3 are
get as
setback.
motivation.
Wait, do you want to just explain the city because of that? Or is that because of the orientation? Do many people actually go away from that because of the orientation?
It's just a fact. Some people are very interested in energy efficiency and solar and all that kind of stuff. That's very important.
So they would.
Other people are more interested in the location of the building, proximity to parking,
Some stuff
location of the
that
athletic
lives in
field.
the middle,
Some orientation of the building might change a little bit.
So many
So with with the entire, the safety, it can only be the sports criteria, the safety is during the construction safety, which they're changing.
No. Sometimes it's hard to separate the stuff out. So for example, if you're doing a renovation, you have portables, that's a consideration. A lot of temporary costs that you have to think about when you're going to run. You spent the money, it's gone, you spent the construction.
Where the courtyard, it's basically the same footprint with a courtyard, so the
Safety and security is also something. Having administration, there's the front entrance.
The fields that are made, those kind of dolls.
So it means that in the current part of the question, temporary part, just added it to the
I know we added 2 stories, it's more comfortable. Yeah, from a heating point of view, that's one of the other studies we'll do, is we build these models, computer models, and then we can simulate. Based on the orientation.
Should we see if we can grab one of the red ones?
The nice thing about this is that you can put some parking in here now for use during construction. And then finish it out afterwards, and you're not like going to different parking areas and moving fields and this. That's kind of what's happening.
You would have to move the baseball field, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
As you saw here, we were sitting in the cafeteria.
Because they're side by side.
And all of these options are real good, we have to get into the fields after the construction is completed. Predominantly because the footprint is small, you can just store it out in the morning. It's a slightly better.
Looks like the traffic.
1 and 3, both, 1 and 2, I'm sorry, both have the classrooms oriented to the south, north and south. So the 300 is better than that. This one's laid out kind of similar to what Jake's talking about.
The thing with the renovation plan, we basically need to strip the building down to its skeleton. The windows are no good, the ceilings are no good, the mechanics are no good. With the renovation, all you really do is save the
One improvement is we'll have better glass.
changes in the size of your glass.
So
You may end up
JV soccer, right?
Oh, soccer.
Hey, Greylock just went through,
So that's
he had
what this
rail.
is?
there's a kind you can see through, but they still take a lot of glare out.
So, but
As
there's,
opposed to solid, solid black. They used to have, but it was in.
College is not paying for it.
oh no, that's, yeah,
My taxes are all
it's just really sad.
Not getting anything.
Softball field, there is another practice. There's another one. Between them and the football.
These are original stuff. The teachers put they kept, so I remember they kept the gym and renovated.
We don't have a tennis court.
Right. I'm sorry, I like to say that, because they're gonna take out the baseball field and that's them putting over the field.
These are the new ones.
These ones are untouched, right?
And the ones that are colored in are right now, the ones that are green are those.
This one looks like. So they took away here, the soccer field right here, the
I was on the building.
right now, we have a soccer field inside 4 right now. Where's the side one?
The two on the other side.
So here's the one
That
that's
one,
right.
the hallway.
This one's better for you. This one is really.
You should drive in this one on the right.
Yeah, but like, the younger kids are always
We try to avoid, in a renovation scenario too, you have to, actually, put in portable buses while you renovate a piece of the building. MSBA will not pay for any portion of the fraud. They consider that all reimbursed.
I think it's exciting.
Expansion is somewhat limited for today.
They all do, the one we looked at, that's just.
Right, yeah.
That's where we put it. You know, the pot on the end, but you can do the same thing here. Underneath.
At some point through this.
Maybe that's for sure. Put the two high school. I think 2A is the best option, but this is saying that 3A has the best. Is that what you're saying? That needs to say 3A.
That was essentially renovation there, but they had the space.
Any other thoughts?
Well,
consolidation of high schools and
right.
we're down to
And Taconics already closed. Population, so that instructional cost, that's what I had read.
High school?
You know, I think that goes like political
We should talk about neutralizing.
Well, you know, it's right now, yeah.
I like the natural light.
Great American.
I like the courtyard.
chairs.
I think it's
How old was mine?
I don't know exactly, I would assume it's similar to. The problem is when you get in the MSBA program, if you don't, do it, you go to the bottom of the list, so it's probably 10 years.
How do you feel having closed with some of those? And these are,
I assume you have to spend money over 10 years.
the ones I've seen.
This joint, yeah, you got this long wing going up
Because
this
you
way.
can't get like equipment in there, it's really like.
It takes a lot, it takes a garden.
oh, that's what you're talking about. I thought you meant the open courtyard, that would take.
And, you know, the job.
Well, anything that
Any type
requires
of
a garden.
require maintenance.
Details on say, okay, we're not going to.
Existing auditorium. Yes.
Where is the cafeteria in this one?
After we renovated,
Between the academic wing and the box space is where you put the
you're probably
cafeteria.
not going to
So in all
have
the
many
models,
seats,
it's
because
the
the
same
seats you have in there are kind of small, and you don't have many handicapped seats.
So what you have is, kids come from the academic area, they have lunch, and there's like a common space there for them to talk. And then upstairs is a learning commons, so that's where your library, your meeting space is. And the space, kind of like the same size, sort of. Yes.
Operating costs might be slightly different, the one with the north side.
And this will have a lot of
Otherwise, yeah, they're basically.
like this, the line.
Right there?
I was telling them down at the other side of the table, this renovation is likely to have trailers that house students while you take parts of the building. And the negative part of that is the MSBA will not pay for any of the temporary facilities. Well, hopefully not. But they, if you want to look at, reimbursements,
It would have been nice to be outside.
they won't pay for any of the
Or even
maintenance.
like a pat, like, maybe not even a
You
quarter.
do that piecemeal renovation, where you just tear down the building.
How big is the special ed area? Maybe any space for those students?
Temporary costs too.
Yeah, that's actually where there's the most flexibility.
In this one, we can
Outside of
You can buy your special ed.
early, we can use it as temporary.
MSBA reimburses for those, so
this
this is
option
one of the
for that
special ed.
option.
Oh, it's usually-
Oh, so the room's right there. Oh, I see.
This says office here, this says life.
The life skills, we have like this is all of those.
Yeah, you know, this one's slightly similar, we said, this one still, you know.
And then
One of
also
them,
do
it
this
wasn't
in the
near the
classroom.
gym, which didn't make sense.
I hear that often, and usually we hear it when we go into analyze our existing building, and an old
I don't
timer
remember
will
what
say,
section we
building
had.
was designed to have a third floor.
Guidance has very
We've heard that firsthand. Every school, in my career, I've been doing this for over 30 years, we've never added a additional floor to the school. For one, you can't do it while the school below is occupied.
Yeah, but it was not directly next
You
to
can
the
do
gym.
that while the building.
What I saw is
And so you gain that swing space.
In fact, it's
Secondly, rooms generally are not, even if they
the main entrance of the project. Jim. There.
I asked them why we built it in before, the old roof. Very expensive. They've done it on some buildings, buildings or warehouses or, where they.
You have to slope in the roof on the list,
And they could
that's the time we went to
It's not.
I do like it.
The negatives made it worse.
One story, that was good.
Yeah, challenge on them. We don't have those big story natural building. The way the corridor.
So there's obviously more state aid with the
That's the corridor.
new construction.
It says 18 months, it's chronic on time.
We're supposed to be done 29th.
Percent.
This way, these works out around that collaborative. Yeah, you don't have collaborative areas.
In the renovation, there were a lot of things that not reimbursable.
One thing I better throw in.
So for example, Wahconah is much bigger than Wahconah, this is state.
Right.
No, we go this.
So when you do the renovation of it, you're renovating a large amount of space.
So it's not that
If
hard.
you're building a new one, it's all renovation.
You could not carry on.
So it tends to not be good.
Did you ever go in the Berkshire Hills?
So renovation programs are as much as.
Back when I first opened, it was the same, like, you couldn't,
One way to.
we couldn't be talking here.
I would like to make a pitch with the 2A. Whatever can be done to have non-parallel walls. That's the first. The way the circulation works. Nobody knows it. The main connecting cord is here, and there's a single cord here that's clustered each end, so it's like a dumbbell.
Parking in this one.
Think of it that way, right? And
So they do, if you look at
and
the,
so, if you're in this cluster, there's no traffic. People are all going this way.
What do you like about the parking?
That actually means something positive, that there's no.
These other options, it seems to be split up between several different
But if you're
areas.
here and want to get.
Whereas this one, it seems to be one main parking.
That other one.
I learned something.
So you're not segregating teacher parking from faculty parking from student
And it
parking?
still could slightly avoid the cluster, but that's the reason for doing that.
Is that what these are separated out for? Faculty and students?
But it's going to be 2 stories high, so it doesn't have quite enough light. The spaces that are around the learning.
I've seen,
Here you can see Scott. Adding another floor there. Probably you can see Scott. You can see the side of the building. Nice view. That's one reason they explain the learning pattern is angled a little bit. It's open so that the view to the trees beyond this corridor. So, you have very well. That's some people will say, well, that would be open, more perimeter around. Yeah.
we're pretty well done. You guys,
It's got more perimeter, maybe.
As good as we're renovating.
In there. Or the other way, but principals would say, well, I can be close for that, I can feel comfortable letting kids out there knowing that they're not going to they can take. That is the logic. Particularly on the fence around the open.
Ganging up on the I came in, it was just him, I came out, it was him and done.
But still contained. Yeah.
It's hard with that schedule, like he's supposed to take Joey to make some calls, it's gonna be late, so I never really planned my schedule. What did you do? I explored the class.
no longer.
We opened up to which lucky man is getting crazy. Which is good. Nice light, that's right.
She's got across there.
How do you get all these things that you really want to make this happen? Think about it. I think you make sense of all the yes, more I think of
Where is graduation normally?
Used to be outside.
I think I got
Okay, hello. It's gonna take 5 or 10 more minutes at the most here, just to wrap up and let everyone know what went on at each table. So whoever was taking notes at each table will kind of share the high points of the discussion. And again, we're not necessarily trying to come to conclusions tonight, but we're looking for input. And we'll talk about next steps.
So this is from the middle group in the center. This discussion started with a flat roof versus slope roof. What are the advantages in terms of longevity and cost?
Carl, I couldn't really answer that one. I don't know if we have to know about it now or wait.
Well, we did a whole study on this, almost every project, where people are, kind of nervous about flat roofs. So we can share that information with folks, but slope roofs are really not necessarily better against preventing leaks in buildings of this scale, and nor are they more economical.
We also talked a lot about safety and security. We were looking at the design option that had the courtyard in the middle, so we were talking about some of the safety issues with that building and the advantages of having a closed courtyard. We talked about cost, and Melissa talked a little bit about how that would work for the towns. We spent some time talking about energy efficiency, both in terms of materials that would be used for construction, and also heating sources, geothermal, wood chips, gas, oil. We have solar panels, energy efficiency of windows, all those kinds of things. We did talk about the fact that the costs that are represented are the full project costs, that those include furniture and equipment and site work and all those other components. We also talked about long-term energy costs and some of the benefits of orienting the building for north-south lighting. The idea that we have multiple tech ed spaces, and maybe one of them could include CNC machinery. We're a community that has a lot of injection molding, so maybe that's something that we could support in one of those tech spaces. Big one that I don't think has come up at any of the building committee meetings, and was such a great point, is that maybe one of the additional fields, practice fields, could be used to bring softball back on campus. And then the other thing that we were looking at were the different times required with each reno or new building option.
Construction duration? Yeah. Okay. Zucker?
There was one other point too, about acoustic treatment. I want to make sure that's in there.
Within the building? Acoustic treatment within
Yeah.
classrooms and so forth?
Right.
Okay.
Some of the plans were good in that regard with non-parallel walls. That's a big deal.
Right. Our group spent some time discussing the costs and the reimbursable costs. I think that subject has probably been discussed at many tables here. And we tried to understand what the project cost was versus construction cost and the reimbursement. We looked at the reimbursable cost for the renovation project versus reimbursement for the new construction project. So we tried to understand various costs associated with this project and the reimbursable aspect of it. We did talk a little bit about science labs and how those are planned for the high schools, specifically for the new high school, what the science lab will look like. Discussed parking and review the options where the parking is located for the site, whether it's in front of the school or at the back of the school, and looked at advantages, disadvantages of planning the site and what's important from that point of view. We did get into the discussion of curb appeal of the building. As you approach the building, what it would look like, and actually our...
You had architects at your table.
We had a whole group of architects, they're designing the building. We already know which option we want to use and design it to the minutiae detail. We did talk about the sizes of common spaces and the capacity of the common spaces, trying to understand how it affects overall cost again, and how it affects the future of this building. And we did touch base on the athletic fields, again trying to understand the renovation options versus the new construction options, and how the athletic fields will lay out and what capacity was there for the athletics. Did spend some time discussing security for the building, single point of entry, and that transitioned into us discussion of the courtyard option versus no courtyard option, and security was part of that discussion. And so we have some work to do on our end to address all those questions, and we took notes for that.
Okay. Great,
Thank you.
Yeah, very much the same, not so much about roofs, but very interested in parking, different kinds of parking, different spaces, and especially having some parking up front near the big box areas for public events. Some talk about energy, some talk about reimbursable costs. The courtyard, if there's going to be a courtyard, it should be closed for safety. That's a good idea, but maybe not a courtyard if it's not maintained well, there isn't a good plan for it. Leaning toward NC 2A and NC 3A, and whatever it is, the most important thing is what's going to be the cost to the district. Everybody's anxious to get to that number.
Okay. We had very similar kinds of concerns. We focused a little more on what criteria to use to evaluate these, and then we did come to sort of a consensus. One of the topics that is somewhat new that we didn't phrase this way before, but looking at the tax impact in the political saleability of these options needs to be considered there. And again, that translates into scrutinizing what is the actual cost to the district and calculating some estimate of reimbursement, but thinking also and emphasizing about long-term value versus first cost. That we shouldn't get totally swayed by first cost only. We need to think about long-term value in any of these. There was pretty much consensus that any renovation options don't really lend themselves to 21st century learning here, the layouts. And that environmental and energy advantages is an important criteria, and we came to somewhat consensus, NC2A or 8.1. So courtyard or open, not quite decided yet, but that was our preferred option at our table. So we'll take that under advisement and move forward. So we just want to, in closing, kind of remind people, I think you all probably know this project is, I think, well covered, and there are several websites and opportunities to stay abreast of what's going on here. Please, refer to those. And then the last thing is, this isn't the last time you'll see us. We want to come back and do this again, probably in September, October period time, when we're focusing. We can get down to designing one option there, and now we're really developing it, and looking for input on that from a design point of view, as well as, what kind of windows, what kind of roof, what kind of equipment, that sort of thing, because at that point, we'll be focusing on developing the schematic design, which includes the scope, the budget, and the schedule of the project. So we'll look at phasing impacts, how do we build this project while the school stays in operation, things like that level of detail at the next set of sessions like this. And of course, we're continuing to work with the building committee on a regular basis too. So, thank you very much for participating again. Thank whoever brought the goodies, and have some on your way out. We appreciate that very much. Thanks.
Thank you.